Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating framework for the ultimate spiritual fresh start. We're going to explore human nature, the baggage we carry around, and how to literally hit the reset button on our lives. Whether you're a deep philosophy nerd or just looking for a totally new perspective on personal growth, this breakdown is going to give you a ton to think about.
So our foundation today is a translated text called Eternal Buddha by Ryuho Okawa. Specifically, we're focusing right in on Chapter 4, which is brilliantly titled Time to Leap. Now, impartially speaking, this text offers a highly detailed, philosophical roadmap of the whole human journey. It doesn't just ask why we're here, it actually attempts to answer how we should build our lives while we're here. And it uses some incredibly vivid imagery to do it, which we're going to break down right now. I want to start by throwing this concept right at you. What if forgetting everything you once knew was actually the ultimate gift of freedom? I mean, think about it. Most of us view memory loss as an absolute tragedy, right? We cling to our past experiences, our past mistakes, all our accumulated knowledge. But this text flips that entirely on its head when it comes to birth. It asks us to look at the erasure of past memories not as a tragic loss, but as a brilliant, liberating feature of human existence. The text actually calls this true equality and freedom, the condition of being born without past memories. According to this framework, if we all remembered our past spiritual successes or, our epic failures, the playing field wouldn't be level at all. So by wiping the slate completely clean, the universe, or the Buddha's compassion as the text frames it, guarantees that every single soul gets to start completely from zero. No one gets an unfair head start, and absolutely no one is penalized for past mistakes the second they take their first breath. It's a total reset.
We can really see the power of this blank slate by comparing two totally distinct states of being. Before birth, the text describes a time of pure joyous anticipation. Imagine souls just practically vibrating with excitement at getting a fresh start. But then contrast that with earthly life. Because as we grow up, that pristine blank slate gets scribbled all over. We start to develop unique, deeply ingrained, and sometimes pretty problematic worldly habits. The pure anticipation of the starting line quickly gives way to the messy, complicated reality of just living.
Which brings up a massive question. Structurally, we really have to ask ourselves, if we all genuinely start as zero, completely equal and totally free of past baggage, why in the world do we develop such wildly different tendencies? Like, why do some people naturally lean towards generosity, while others lean towards greed? If the slate was truly blank, shouldn't we all turn out pretty similar? It's a huge paradox, but the source material tackles it head-on. And the answer? It lies deep within the architecture of who we really are.
The text explains this paradox by looking right below the surface. So while your conscious memory is totally wiped clean at birth, the source argues that the root of the soul itself still holds on to inherent tendencies. As time passes and we navigate adulthood, these deeply ingrained roots naturally begin to resurface. That beautiful blank slate of our conscious mind starts getting colored by these older hidden habits. And that is what pulls us in all sorts of different directions, creating those diverse, sometimes really conflicting behaviors we see every day.
This leads us to a pretty critical crossroads in our spiritual development, brilliantly illustrated by a metaphor of construction. We are all building a life, right? But are we building a fragile castle on sand, or are we building on a solid foundation? A fragile life is one built purely on superficial desires, stuff that looks super impressive on the outside but has zero structural integrity. Contrast that with what the text calls the profound path of right thought, which is a core practice of the Eightfold Path. That path builds an unshakable internal solidity.
Let's look at exactly what constitutes this sand. The source outlines some very specific self-serving pursuits here. We're talking about an endless greed for wealth, the relentless pursuit of social status, vanity, arrogance, and even just superficial academic knowledge used for show. The text is super direct about this. It views these pursuits as completely devoid of true selflessness. Basically, if your life's entire meaning is propped up by these things, you are meticulously constructing a magnificent, towering castle directly on top of a pile of loose, shifting sand. So what happens to that sand? Well, the text introduces this really striking concept called the winds of impermanence. Now, these aren't physical storms. They are the inevitable, inescapable forces of time and mortality blowing in from the afterlife. These winds are literally designed to test the structural integrity of your life. And if your foundation is made of those worldly desires we just talked about, status, vanity, wealth, these winds will effortlessly blow your fragile little sandcastle away.
And the text issues a really stark warning here. Absolutely no human being can escape these winds. They are going to arrive at the end of life for everyone, regardless of how much wealth or status you've managed to hoard. It emphasizes a profound sense of urgency. We literally cannot wait until the winds are already blowing to start pouring our concrete. We have to actively solidify that internal foundation well beforehand.
Which, of course, brings us to the solution. How exactly do we do that? How do we reinforce this foundation? The text proposes a deliberate active practice that it beautifully calls washing the fabric of the soul. I just love this metaphor because it takes this really lofty spiritual concept and turns it into something as practical and everyday as doing your laundry. It implies that just like your clothes, your mind naturally accumulates dirt just by going out in the world, and it needs to be actively cleaned.
Let's break down exactly how the text says we should wash this fabric. It outlines a method known as reflective meditation, and it's a really clear three-step process. First, you have to look inward daily. Second, you honestly identify where those specific sands have crept in, the greed, the vanity, the arrogance. And third, you actively wipe away that dust of the mind. You essentially treat this reflection as a literal daily hygiene routine for your inner self.
Because think about it. Just as dust settles on your furniture every single day, worldly desires constantly settle on the mind. You can't just clean it once and call it a day. It requires a rigorous daily commitment to sweeping away that superficial dirt. And the text points out that when you do this, you eventually find the gold coins. The pure, true self is waiting down there, like uncovering hidden gold coins beneath years of dust, finally ready to be revealed and strengthened.
This daily practice really ties into the ultimate goal of our whole human journey. We've established that physical birth, starting at zero without those past memories, is our first chance. But the text argues that simply being born is definitely not the finish line. The critical moment, the real turning point, is our second chance. This happens when we awaken to these spiritual truths during our lifetime, engage in that reflective meditation, and consciously choose to redesign our lives from the inside out. The author places immense weight on this realization. In fact, the text explicitly states, encountering these teachings is a time of miracles. That is a huge assertion. The source isn't just saying, hey, this is good advice. It's framing the exact moment you realize you can rewrite your soul's trajectory as a literal miracle. It is the moment the soul shifts from just passively accumulating worldly sand to actively building an eternal foundation.
And that realization triggers what this entire chapter is named after, the time when the soul leaps. The text describes this climax as an experience of just unprecedented joy. When you finally clear away the dust of vanity and greed, when you finally stop building those castles on sand, your true, powerful self is revealed. You aren't just walking the path anymore. Your soul is making a massive, vertical leap in its evolution.
So, we arrive at the ultimate question presented by this whole framework. We know about the blank slate we're given at birth. We know the dangerous sand that threatens our integrity. And we know the daily maintenance required to wash the fabric of the soul. So I'll leave you to think about this. When those inevitable winds of impermanence finally blow, will the life you are building right now be scattered like sand, or will your internal foundation hold firm? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.